I still remember the humiliation burning through my veins as I stood there, coffee pot in hand, moving from executive to executive while they barely acknowledged my existence. My name is Daniel Wright, 33 years old, and despite my master's degree in business administration and 5 years of experience in strategic planning, I was reduced to being the coffee guy at the most important meeting of the quarter. It all started 3 weeks ago, when our department head, Richard Thompson, announced that Stellar Innovations, one of the biggest tech giants in the country, was interested in a potential partnership. This was huge news for our mid-size consulting firm. Landing this client could put us on the map nationally and bring in millions in revenue. Everyone was buzzing with excitement, especially me. I had actually researched Stellar's business model for my master's thesis and had been following their market movements for years. "We need to assemble our best team for the presentation," Richard had announced in our morning huddle. "Only the top performers will get a seat at the table." My heart raced with excitement. This was my chance to shine, to finally show what I was capable of. I'd been working 60-hour weeks for the past 2 years, developing innovative strategies that had saved our smaller clients thousands of dollars. I knew Stellar's pain points and had already been drafting ideas on how we could help them revolutionize their supply chain. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing a comprehensive analysis, staying at the office until midnight, missing my niece's birthday party, barely eating or sleeping. The passion I had for this project consumed me. When I finally submitted my proposal to Richard, I felt confident. My analysis was thorough, my suggestions innovative yet practical. There was no way he could ignore the value I could bring to this meeting. The day before the big presentation, Richard called a team meeting to announce who would be representing our firm. "Mark will lead the financial projections," he began. Mark, who had been with the company for only 8 months, nodded with a smug smile. "Jessica will handle the marketing strategy." Jessica, Richard's golf buddy's daughter, who had just graduated college. Name after name was called, and with each one, my hope diminished. When the list was complete, my name was nowhere to be found. "Richard," I said, approaching him after the meeting, portfolio in hand. I noticed I wasn't assigned a role. "I've prepared an extensive analysis on Stellar's supply chain inefficiencies and—" "Ah, Daniel," he interrupted, barely looking up from his phone. "We need someone to manage the logistics of the meeting. You know, make sure the presentation room is set up, that there's enough coffee, water, that sort of thing. Can I count on you for that?" My throat tightened. "But I've been working on strategies that could significantly impact the proposal. I really think—" "Look," he cut me off, finally meeting my eyes with cold indifference. "We need our best people front and center for this. Mark and Jessica have the kind of presence we need. You're great at the behind-the-scenes stuff. That's valuable too." The subtext was clear. In Richard's eyes, I wasn't good enough, not polished enough, not connected enough. Despite my education, my experience, my dedication, I was invisible to him. And so there I was, on the day of the meeting, arranging pastries on a tray, while the team I should have been part of reviewed their notes one last time. The executives from Stellar arrived, followed by our own CEO, Jonathan Barnes, a figure so rarely seen on our floor that some newer employees thought he was just a corporate myth. "Coffee, please," Richard said to me without even a glance, snapping his fingers as if I were a waiter at a restaurant. I swallowed my pride and picked up the coffee pot, moving around the large conference table, filling cups and melting into the background as the strategic future of our company was discussed without a single input from me. I stood in the corner of the room, the coffee pot growing heavier in my hands as I watched Mark stumble through his financial projections. The representatives from Stellar Innovations exchanged skeptical glances. Their CFO, a sharp-eyed woman with silver-rimmed glasses, kept squinting at the numbers as if trying to make sense of them. "And as you can see," Mark continued, his confidence wavering, "our projected ROI for this partnership would be approximately, He shuffled through his papers, clearly having lost his place. I knew those numbers by heart. I had run those projections myself last week, before Richard had decided I wasn't presentation material. I could have stepped in, saved Mark from his fumbling, but what was the point? I was just the coffee guy today. Jessica's presentation on marketing strategy wasn't any better. Her slides were flashy but lacked substance, filled with generic buzzwords that could have applied to any company in any industry. The Stellar team's enthusiasm was visibly waning. Their CEO, Alex Chen, kept checking his watch, while their head of operations had started doodling on his notepad. My stomach twisted into knots. This was a train wreck. We were losing the biggest opportunity our company had seen in years, and I was powerless to stop it. The portfolio containing my comprehensive analysis sat in my messenger bag by the door, useless. When the coffee ran low, I slipped out to brew a fresh pot. In the break room, I allowed myself a moment of frustration, gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. "Everything okay in here?" a voice asked. I turned to find one of the Stellar executives, their head of supply chain according to his name tag, pouring himself a glass of water. "Yes, sir. Just brewing more coffee," I replied, forcing professionalism into my voice. He nodded, taking a sip of water. "That presentation in there?" He trailed off, shaking his head slightly. "It's not going well?" I asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Let's just say I've seen more coherent strategies from my 12-year-old school project." He chuckled, but there was disappointment in his eyes. "Your colleagues seem to have a very surface-level understanding of our operations." Before I could stop myself, I blurted out, "The bottleneck isn't in your distribution centers. It's in your inventory management system." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "Your current system treats all products with the same inventory protocol, but your high-volume specialty components require a completely different approach. You're overstocking the wrong items and understocking the critical ones." His eyes widened slightly. "How do you know that?" I hesitated, then decided I had nothing to lose. "I've been studying Stellar's model for years. Your quarterly reports show consistent write-offs in the same product categories, while expedited shipping costs have increased by 32% year over year. That suggests misaligned inventory predictions." The executive, David Kim, according to his badge, looked genuinely intrigued. "And you are?" "Daniel Wright. I work in strategic planning here. Or at least that's what my job title says." I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. "And yet you're serving coffee today," he observed. I shrugged, embarrassed. "Someone has to do it. Do you have any documentation on these observations of yours?" I gestured toward my bag by the door of the conference room. A full portfolio. Inventory optimizatio. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me, standing there with the coffee pot still in my hand, feeling completely exposed. Richard's face contorted with confusion and alarm. "I'm sorry, who?" Richard asked, looking frantically between Alex Chen and me. "Daniel Wright," Chen repeated firmly, his gaze still fixed on me. "Is that you?" I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "Yes, sir." "I understand you have some thoughts on our supply chain challenges," Chen said, gesturing to the empty chair beside him. "Please, join us." Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "Mr. Chen, Daniel is just here to assist with the meeting logistics. If you have questions about our proposal—" "I'd like to hear from Mr. Wright," Chen interrupted, his tone making it clear the matter wasn't up for debate. "David tells me he has some interesting insights." I carefully set down the coffee pot, aware that every person in the room was staring at me. Jessica's mouth had fallen open in shock. Mark was frantically whispering to Richard, who looked like he might explode at any moment. "My portfolio," I said, finding my voice. "It's in my bag by the door." Jonathan Barnes, our own CEO who had been silently observing the disastrous meeting, stood up. "I'll get it for you, Daniel." There was curiosity in his eyes as he retrieved my messenger bag and handed it to me. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled out the leather portfolio I'd spent weeks preparing. I'd imagined presenting these ideas countless times, but never like this. Never after being humiliated. Never with Richard glaring daggers at me. "Thank you for this opportunity," I began, taking a deep breath to steady myself. "I've been studying Stellar Innovations operations for several years now, and I believe I've identified the key inefficiencies in your supply chain." I opened my portfolio and distributed the executive summaries I'd prepared, the ones Richard had refused to even look at. As the Stellar executives began reviewing my analysis, I launched into the presentation I'd rehearsed in my apartment night after night. "Your current inventory system treats all components with the same methodology, but your high-precision specialty parts require a different approach entirely. By implementing a hybrid inventory management system that uses just-in-time principles for standard components and safety stock protocols for critical specialty items, you could reduce overstock costs by approximately 27%, while decreasing stockouts by 41%. I walked them through my analysis, pointing out the patterns in their quarterly reports that revealed the problem. With each slide, with each data point, I felt more confident, more in my element. This was what I was meant to do. Not serve coffee, not fade into the background, but create solutions to complex problems. The Stellar executives were engaged now, asking pointed questions that I answered with confidence. David Kim, the supply chain executive I'd spoken with in the break room, was nodding along, occasionally adding his own insights that complemented mine. Alex Chen had put his phone away and was leaning forward, his eyes intense as he absorbed every word. After about 20 minutes of discussion, Chen held up his hand. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," he said, looking around at his team, who were nodding in agreement. "Someone who actually understands our pain points instead of trying to sell us generic solutions." Richard, who had been silently fuming throughout my presentation, finally spoke up. "Mr. Chen, while Daniel has some interesting perspectives, I assure you that our official proposal doesn't address our actual needs," Chen finished for him. "Your team has spent the last hour telling us what you think we want to hear, not showing us that you understand what we need." He turned to me. "Except for Mr. Wright here." Jonathan Barnes, our CEO, who had been silently observing the entire time, finally spoke. "Alex, I apologize for the confusion today. It seems there's been a serious oversight in how we prepared for this meeting." He looked at me with new eyes, as if seeing me for the first time. "Daniel, how long have you been with us?" 5 years, sir," I replied, still hardly believing this was happening. 5 years, Barnes repeated, glancing pointedly at Richard, whose face was now ashen. "And today you were assigned to serve coffee," Richard sputtered. "Daniel is more of a behind-the-scenes analyst." "I didn't think—" "That's evident," Barnes cut him off sharply. He turned back to Chen. "Alex, what would you say to continuing this discussion with a fresh approach? With Daniel leading our team?" My heart nearly stopped. Leading the team? Me? Chen smiled for the first time since arriving. "That's exactly what I was going to suggest." He turned to me. "Mr. Wright, if you were heading this partnership, what would be your first steps?" The room fell silent again, all eyes on me. Richard looked like he might be ill. Jessica and Mark were exchanging panicked glances. But Jonathan Barnes was looking at me with something I'd never seen directed my way before in this company. Respect. I squared my shoulders and met Alex Chen's gaze directly. 5 years of being overlooked, of having my ideas dismissed, of watching less qualified colleagues take credit for my work. All of that had led to this moment. "First," I said with newfound confidence, "I would propose a 2-week assessment period where our team works directly with your supply chain managers to document the current process flow." As I outlined my implementation strategy, I could see heads nodding around the table. For the first time in my career, people who mattered were actually listening. The meeting that had started as my greatest humiliation ended as my greatest triumph. After I finished outlining my implementation strategy, Alex Chen extended his hand across the table. "Daniel, this is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we've been searching for," he said, his firm handshake confirming the sincerity of his words. "I'd like to move forward with Stellar's partnership, but only if you're leading the project." My heart swelled with a mixture of pride and vindication. From the corner of my eye, I could see Richard shifting uncomfortably in his seat, his face a mask of forced politeness that couldn't hide his shock and dismay. "It would be my honor," I replied, maintaining my composure despite the emotions swirling inside me. As the Stellar executives gathered their materials, clearly energized by the unexpected turn of events, our CEO Jonathan Barnes walked over to speak with me privately. "Daniel, I owe you an apology," he said, his voice low but intense. "I had no idea your talents were being overlooked in this way." I nodded, unsure how to respond. What could I say? That for years I'd been passed over for promotions? That Richard consistently gave my best ideas to his favorites? That I'd almost given up hope of ever being recognized? "Sir, I've always just wanted to contribute meaningfully to the company," I finally said. Barnes nodded thoughtfully. "Well, that changes today. I'd like you in my office tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. We need to discuss your new role as project lead for the Stellar account, and your future with the company." He glanced meaningfully at Richard, who was now frantically trying to ingratiate himself with one of the Stellar executives. "There are going to be some changes around here." As the meeting concluded and people began filing out, David Kim, the supply chain executive who had first noticed me, approached with a smile. "I have a good eye for underutilized talent," he said, handing me his business card. "You've got the kind of analytical mind we value at Stellar. This partnership will be good for both our companies. But remember, if things don't work out here, give me a call." I thanked him, tucking the card carefully into my wallet. For the first time in years, I felt like I had options, like my skills actually mattered. The room gradually emptied until only Richard and I remained. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken recriminations. He finally broke it, his voice strained. "You could have come to me if you felt your ideas weren't being heard," he said. straightening papers that didn't need straightening, avoiding my eyes. I did, I replied simply. Multiple times. Well, you should have been more persistent, he snapped, his true colors showing through the thin veneer of professionalism. You can't expect recognition if you don't fight for it. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed late perfecting proposals that were ignored. All the meetings where I'd raised my hand only to be overlooked. All the times I'd approached Richard's office only to be told he was too busy. You're right, Richard, I said, gathering my portfolio. I should have fought harder, but I'm fighting now. I left him there, surrounded by the coffee cups I'd no longer be filling, and walked out with my head held high. The next morning, I arrived at Jonathan Barnes's office at precisely 8 a.m., wearing my best suit and carrying a detailed outline for the stellar project. His assistant smiled at me, a genuine smile, not the dismissive one I was accustomed to receiving, and ushered me in immediately. Barnes was waiting with a cup of coffee, which he handed to me as I entered. I figured it was someone else's turn to serve the coffee, he said with a knowing smile. The meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end of it, I wasn't just the lead on the stellar project. I was the newly appointed Director of Strategic Partnerships, a position created specifically for me, with a salary double what I'd been making, and a team of 5 analysts reporting directly to me. When I returned to my department, the change in how people treated me was immediate and dramatic. Colleagues who had barely acknowledged my existence were suddenly eager to congratulate me. Jessica and Mark, who had smirked as Richard reduced me to serving coffee, now looked at me with a mixture of fear and desperate ingratiation. Daniel, I always said you were management material, Mark claimed, slapping me on the back as if we were old friends. This project is so perfect for you, Jessica gushed. I'd love to be considered for your team. I smiled politely but made no promises. Their sudden recognition meant nothing to me now. The people who couldn't see my value when I was serving coffee didn't deserve my attention now that I was in charge. Richard was conspicuously absent. I later learned from Barnes's assistant that he had been called to a meeting with HR that morning. By the end of the week, the company announced a restructuring of our department, and Richard was transitioned to a consultative role with significantly reduced responsibilities. As I settled into my new office, with a window no less, I came across the coffee pot from that fateful meeting, which someone had thoughtfully delivered to my door with a note. Thought you might want this as a souvenir, JB. I placed it on my shelf, a reminder of where I'd been and how far I'd come. That coffee pot symbolized both the lowest and highest points of my career, the moment I was most invisible, and the moment I finally became impossible to ignore. The weeks that followed transformed not just my career, but my entire life. Leading the Stellar Innovations project gave me a platform to showcase abilities I'd always known I possessed, but had never been allowed to demonstrate. Our implementation team moved with precision and purpose, restructuring Stellar's inventory management systems exactly as I had envisioned. Within 3 months, Stellar was reporting a 24% reduction in overstock costs and a 38% decrease in expedited shipping expenses, numbers that nearly matched my projections. Alex Chen personally called Jonathan Barnes to express his satisfaction, and word of our success spread quickly through the industry. My new position as Director of Strategic Partnerships came with more than just a fancy title and better pay. For the first time, I had real authority, the power to build a team based on merit rather than politics. I remembered how it felt to be overlooked, to have valuable contributions ignored, and I vowed never to let that happen to anyone under my leadership. When assembling my team, I bypassed the usual suspects, the smooth talkers with the right connections, and sought out the hidden talent in our company. I found Layla from accounting, whose insightful analysis had been buried in appendices no one bothered to read. I recruited Trevor from IT, whose innovative solutions had been implemented without credit. I brought in Sophia from customer support, whose frontline experience gave her insights no executive would ever have. Together, we became the most effective team in the company, landing 3 major clients in the first 6 months. Our success wasn't just noticed within the company. Industry publications began featuring our work, and competitors started trying to poach my team members with lucrative offers. I ran into Richard occasionally. After his transition, he'd been given a small office in a remote corner of the building. Our encounters were brief and awkward. The power dynamic had shifted so dramatically that he could barely meet my eyes. Once, in a moment of unexpected vulnerability, he admitted, "I completely misjudged you, Daniel." I simply nodded. No dramatic confrontation was necessary. Success was vindication enough. The true test came almost exactly 1 year after that fateful meeting. Our company was hosting its annual leadership conference, and I was scheduled to deliver the keynote address. As I stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of colleagues, including many who had once dismissed me, I felt a moment of profound gratitude for the journey. Success in business isn't just about having the right ideas, I told the audience. It's about creating environments where the right ideas can be heard, regardless of who proposes them. Innovation doesn't care about hierarchy or politics. The best solutions can come from anywhere, even from the person serving the coffee. I spotted Jessica in the crowd, shifting uncomfortably at the reference. Mark was furiously taking notes, probably hoping to repackage my words as his own insights somewhere down the line. Jonathan Barnes was nodding in agreement, having become a true ally and mentor over the past year. After the conference, a young analyst approached me tentatively. "Mr. Wright, I've been working on an approach to streamline our client onboarding process, but my manager doesn't think it's worth pursuing. Would you have time to look at it?" I smiled, remembering myself just a year earlier, full of ideas but lacking a platform. "I always have time for good ideas," I told her. "And please, call me Daniel." As we walked to my office to review her proposal, I passed the shelf where I still kept that coffee pot, my reminder that sometimes being underestimated can be your greatest advantage, that sometimes the person everyone ignores becomes the person no one can forget. The path from serving coffee to leading projects wasn't one I'd planned, but it taught me the most valuable lesson of my career. Your worth isn't determined by how others see you, but by how clearly you see yourself, and how firmly you stand in that truth, even when no one else can see it yet. 2 years after that transformative meeting, I found myself in Alex Chen's corner office at Stellar Innovations headquarters. The view of the city skyline was breathtaking, but not as impressive as the quarterly results displayed on his tablet, a 42% increase in operational efficiency since implementing my systems. "Daniel, I'll be direct," Alex said, leaning forward in his leather chair. "I want you to join Stellar as our new Chief Operations Officer." The offer was stunning. Triple my current salary, equity options, and the chance to implement my vision across a Fortune 500 company. It was the kind of opportunity most executives spend their entire careers chasing. "I'm honored, Alex," I replied, genuinely moved by his confidence in me. "But I need some time to consider it." He nodded understandingly. "Of course. Take the weekend to think it over." That evening, I found myself back at my company, wandering the now empty halls. I stopped at the conference room where it all began, where I had stood with a coffee pot while my potential remained invisible to almost everyone. As I reflected on the decision before me, Jonathan Barnes appeared in the doorway. "Heard about Chen's offer," he said, stepping into the room. "Impressive, but not surprising." I smiled. Word travels fast. In business, good news always does. He gestured to the conference table. "Mind if we sit?" Not as CEO and director, but as two colleagues. We settled into the chairs, the same ones where the Stellar executives had sat during that fateful meeting. "I can't match Chen's offer," Barnes admitted frankly. "Not the money, not the title." "I know," I replied, "but I'm not sure it's about that anymore." Barnes nodded thoughtfully. 2 years ago, you were serving coffee in this room. Now you're fielding COO offers from Fortune 500 companies. That's quite a journey. "It is," I agreed. "And it's taught me that recognition and titles are important, but they're not everything." I told him about the young analyst whose onboarding process improvements had revolutionized our client acquisition strategy, about Layla, who had gone from buried in accounting to heading her own analytics division, about all the talented people whose voices were now being heard because someone, me, had given them a platform. "If I leave," I explained, "I'd be advancing my career. But what about all the others who still need someone to see their potential?" Barnes studied me with new respect. "So what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking I might stay, but with some conditions. I want to create a genuine innovation pipeline in this company, where good ideas can rise regardless of who proposes them. I want resources to identify and develop overlooked talent, and I want to personally mentor promising employees who might otherwise fall through the cracks." A slow smile spread across Barnes's face. "In other words, you want to ensure no one else ever gets relegated to serving coffee when they should be leading projects." "Exactly." We shook hands on it that night, and by Monday morning I was the newly appointed Chief Innovation Officer of our company, with a mandate to transform our culture from the ground up. I called Alex Chen personally to decline his generous offer. Rather than being disappointed, he seemed intrigued by my choice. "Not many people would turn down a position like this," he remarked. Maybe that's exactly why I needed to, I replied. Some paths are about more than personal advancement. 3 years later, our company's transformation is still unfolding. We've implemented what we call the Coffee Pot Initiative, a program that ensures every employee, regardless of position, has direct channels to propose and develop new ideas. The results have been remarkable. Innovation metrics up 156%, employee satisfaction at record highs, and turnover among high-potential staff down to nearly zero. That coffee pot still sits on my shelf, now accompanied by numerous awards and recognitions. But of all my accomplishments, I'm most proud of the culture we've built, one where no one's potential goes unrecognized, where serving coffee doesn't mean you can't also lead projects. Sometimes visitors ask about that old coffee pot, why a C-level executive would keep such an ordinary object on display. I just smile and tell them, it reminds me of an important business principle. Sometimes the most valuable person in the room is the one nobody's paying attention to. And in that truth lies perhaps the greatest lesson of my journey. True leadership isn't about rising above others. It's about lifting them up alongside you.